Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Delaware County Juvenile Detention Board of Managers to order. The first item is to the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everyone would please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the next item is public comment, and as always, public comment at the outset of the meeting is reserved for items that are specifically on our agenda today. And for any public comment, we ask that members of the public first come to the podium. Please keep your mask on as you're speaking. And we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. And at the outset, please give your name and your address. So any comments from the public? All right, hearing none. The next item is an approval of the minutes for September 21st, and I believe they've been distributed previously. Any questions or comments on the minutes from the board? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Judge. I think I heard you first, and I think I heard a second from the other side. Chris, was that you? Yes. All right. Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item is a report on juvenile services currently provided, and Ms. DiMatteo was going to provide such a report. Ms. DiMatteo, are you prepared to do so?
Some of my staff is, but do you want me to begin with the census as I usually do? Or did you not want me to address the census?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess we can do that at this. Sure, that'd be good.
Director of Juvenile Probation Services. Generally, at each meeting, I just present the basic census as of today. We have 8 juveniles in secure detention. 3 are presently at Bucks County, 3 at Aspire, 1 at Chester County, and 1 at Abraxas, Morgantown. We had one of the individuals who's currently at Aspire was a transfer from Montgomery County after a request to remove because of behaviors. We're now indicating that on the weekly report that we're sending so you can see the transfer because the numbers shift. The system doesn't calculate the prior detention episode in its calculation.
Any questions from the board for that part?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a quick question. So when a kid is moved from one facility to the other, what is that? What status are they on? Is there like a new charge? Is it sort of like an administrative thing?
No,
Like
this
what-
is because the facility said that we no longer wish to have him there, and because they're privately contracted and have choice, then we have so many hours, depending on the facility, to move them from one detention center to another.
But an infraction doesn't follow the kid from one facility to the other, right? So it's not like.
Not necessarily unless the individual is criminally charged
Got it.
for an offense as a result of the behavior at the facility. I don't know that that was the case in this particular transfer. I think that they just felt that they could no longer meet the child's needs.
Okay. Is there some official way to like reflect that, the difference between a kid who's moved and it's sort of an administrative matter and a kid who's moved who has a new charge follow them? Is there a classification we should be aware of, or?
No, there'll just be a note that there is a dual episode of detention. So you'll see in the last 1 or 2 census that I indicated the number of days that the individual was at Montgomery County, I believe, and then the number of days now calculated at Aspire.
Okay. Thank you.
In situations like this, is there like an escalation process associated with the contract terms, or they just have the right today's days I decided you can't do anything more? Are there attempts, I guess I'm trying to understand, when you get to the point of transfer, what happens before that? Is there any attempts to like support the young person differently? If you could just kind of clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different across the board. So I assume that there are, I don't have the record in front of me, but I assume that there are interventions to de-escalate or to help the child adjust and change the behavior during the course of their stay at the facility. But the contracts are pretty clear that if they can no longer meet the need, or if they're asking, that they have the right to ask. Most providers have a 30-day clause in our contracts, but these were specific because these are not facilities, the Montgomery and Bucks are not facilities that we would generally contract with on a regular basis, and even our Chester County detention contract, we only used when we had a conflict at our local center, or when there was some sort of co-defendant issue in Lima where they might be better to be housed separately, or there were neighborhood affiliations where it might not be safe. But we rarely used Chester as a detention center unless necessary. And for Bucks and Montgomery, they committed to providing the services as a courtesy, I think, because of the outreach both from our department and from Judge Kelly, and I assume from council during the course of all this.
One more question. To what extent are the terms similar across these facilities, since we're using them in a similar fashion? Does each facility have, I don't know, their own rules that lead to we want to transfer the kid? Or do we have protections in the contract that allow the county to sort of manage the best relationship?
The maximum time that we could, I guess, demand that a provider keep a child in their care after they've filed notice, I believe in all of our contracts, the maximum amount of time is 30 days. For these two particular detention contracts, I think they were very specific because of their own needs, and I know that we had a female, we borrowed a bed through Lehigh or Allegheny County through Abraxas, and we had to move her to another bed because they needed their bed back. And that was like a courtesy. We had no beds at the time, but they had one available. They gave it to us. We used it. And then we just had to make a transfer later on so that they could resume access to their beds. And this is not something I'm sure that you're aware, but this is certainly not unique now to Delaware County. In the past, many counties would reach out to us looking to use some of our unused beds. Now currently, with the closing of the center, the Schumann Center, and the access to available beds because of staffing in some of the private providers like the Abraxas or Aspire. We were just at a meeting on Friday where, we're all talking about this detention crisis and what to do. And I know that I just learned as I was coming into this meeting after a conversation my staff had with Chester County, that Dauphin and another county has reached out to Chester County to engage in a contract. So the competition for these beds is significantly increasing. Now, whether they'll agree to contract with those counties, I don't know yet. But they've lost access to beds, so now they're seeking access to beds on this side of the state.
And I just want to confirm something that I think I heard from you before, which is that the county has attempted previously with Chester County to have reserved beds?
Yeah, so we have an existing contract that allows us access. We've had that for years for both detention and shelter. When we reached out asking them if they would consider doing an advance or prepayment, is what we call it in the contract, they denied us.
Okay, and how recently were those conversations?
Well, I think that a couple of months ago directly from me, and then I think my resource person reached out just before our last meeting to confirm that.
Kevin, Howard Lazarus is here, and he has followed up on those conversations at the point where you think it's relevant.
Howard, why don't we, let's do after Ms. DiMatteo provides her presentation.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
Thank you.
So Ms. DiMatteo, who is going to be providing the?
So I'll introduce Kirsten Fitzsimmons. She is our resource supervisor. She started with us in late 2019, early 2020, but she'll present on just a general overview of the juvenile justice system from kind of the beginning of the continuum to the aftercare portion, along with some other related costs that I think that the board was looking to better understand. So Kirsten?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kirsten Fitzsimmons. I am the resource supervisor for Delaware County Juvenile Probation. Can everybody hear me? Okay,
can.
sorry. As it relates to, we'll follow up with that question later. Anyway, it's my understanding you guys had a lot of questions in regards to continuum of services, in detention, out of detention, a basic overview of juvenile justice in and of itself. So to start off, I would just like to start at the beginning, which is prevention. And there are 3 different types of prevention in juvenile justice. So prevention are programs and initiatives that promote positive youth development and efforts of preventing the occurrence of delinquency. It's further broken down into 3 levels. The first would be primary prevention, which aims to prevent delinquency before it even occurs, so before they even come to probation. An example of primary prevention would be a program called the Incredible Years, which is a research-based, proven effective program for reducing children's aggression and behavior problems and increasing social confidence at home and school. This can be, in our county, it's provided by the Child Guidance Resource Center. The funding is provided through private insurance and medical assistance. There's also the Student Assistance Program. It's a Commonwealth-approved program for kindergarten through 12th grade Pennsylvania schools to help students overcome barriers to their school success and assist students and families in referrals to appropriate resources. Barriers could include substance abuse, mental health concerns. An SAP-trained program of school professionals work with the students and their families in a confidential manner to identify possible obstacles and offer services to help link the students with an appropriate school-based and or community resource that can be provided by Holcomb. Secondary prevention aims to reduce the impact of delinquency that's already occurred. And then there's tertiary prevention, which aims to soften the impact of delinquency that has lasting effects. And an example of that would be Child Guidance's Truancy and Delinquents Prevention Partnership. It's through Child Guidance, Justice Works, and funding is through the county and state, where there's a 20%, 80% share. There's also Project Toward No Drug Abuse, which is a drug abuse prevention curriculum implemented for youth ages 14 to 19, which is also done by Child Guidance. These programs, there's various programs out there. These are just a very little sample that I'm providing, but
And Kirsten, all these programs, are they contracted through Human Services or are they contracted directly with your department?
some are contracted through Human Services and some are contracted through other various funding sources. I don't know if you have a better answer to that. Okay. So after prevention is the next step, which is diversion, which is a lot of what you guys are interested in, the diversionary program. So there's different levels of diversion, right? So there's pre-adjudication, which is defined as providing opportunities for youth who would otherwise face formal processing in the court system so that they can avoid an adjudication of delinquency or conviction for a summary offense, which would instead direct them to an alternative program, including treatment when appropriate. So pre-adjudication diversion occurs at various stages, like I stated. So at the police level, you have youth aid panels, where the police can make a direct referral to the youth aid panel for a citation. Maybe it's an underage drinking. They would refer the kid to a youth aid panel, and the youth aid panel would come up with a solution with the child and the parent, as long as they both consent. The next level will be magisterial district courts, which is an alternative to convictions for summary offenses, retail theft, disorderly conduct, citations like that. Magisterial district judges may divert youth accused of summary offenses to community service or other self-improvement programs. One of those was called STOP, which is a prevention service for like retail theft. All right, and then we move up to diversion in the common pleas court, which would be our juvenile court. So there's different levels of diversion in juvenile court as well. So a pre-petition diversion would be an informal adjustment. So the rules of juvenile court procedure, Rule 312 of juvenile court define an IA as a participation at any time prior to the filing of a petition. The juvenile probation officer may informally adjust the allegation if it appears an adjudication would not be in the best interest of the public and the juvenile, and that the juvenile and the juvenile's guardian consent to an informal adjustment with knowledge that the consent is not obligatory, and that the admitted facts bring the case within the jurisdiction of the court. Completion, they have to successfully complete the informal adjustment, and the case shall be dismissed. And prosecution is barred. So if the juvenile does not successfully complete the informal adjustment, a petition shall be filed. So say a juvenile comes into our court on a petition for a small amount of marijuana possession. The intake officer may say, we're gonna ask for an informal adjustment. They have to get the agreement of the attorneys, the ADA, in order to say, hey, we want to do a diversion with this child. And they usually send a letter out to the police department as well saying, hey, this juvenile is being referred for a diversionary program. Do you have any issue with that? Most of them do not. So then what the intake department would do, they would let the child know, hey, you're being considered for an IA, ask the parent if they would agree to that. The benefits of an IA include that you are only on a probationary supervision for 6 months, not to exceed 9 months. So 6 to 9 months. You would only get extended if they didn't fulfill their obligations in the first 6 months. And then usually another benefit is it includes direct services based off their criminogenic need, their risk and responsivity. And then after the 6 months, they get an automatic expungement. The juvenile doesn't need to do anything in order to get that expungement. The probation department will automatically put a little note in our system saying, hey, this kid's eligible for an expungement. You do the expungement, you run a record check to make sure they don't have any pending charges, and then we would file the expungement with the court.
I have a question really quickly before you move on. Do you
Sure.
have any numbers on how often we use the various types of diversion in Delco? And how that might stack up against the rest of the counties in the Commonwealth?
I'm sure we do. I don't have them handy, but I can get it for you for next meeting.
That'd be great.
So an IA was pre-petition. A consent decree would be post-petition. So that's the next level of diversion. So a consent decree is an agreement at any time after the filing of a petition and before the entry of an adjudication order. The court may, upon agreement of the attorney for the Commonwealth and the juvenile, suspend the proceedings and continue the juvenile under supervision in the juvenile's home under terms and conditions negotiated with the juvenile probation office, and the order of the court continuing the juvenile under supervision shall be known as a consent decree. The conditions, the court shall explain on the record or in writing the terms, condition, and duration of the consent decree pursuant to Rule 373. And 2, the consequences for violating the conditions of the consent decree, which include the petition under which the juvenile was continued under supervision may, in the discretion of the attorney for the Commonwealth, following consultation with the juvenile probation officer, be reinstated and the juvenile held accountable as if the consent decree had never been entered. Prior to discharge by the juvenile probation officer or an expiration of the consent decree, there is a filing of a new petition against the juvenile, or B, the juvenile otherwise fails to fulfill express terms and conditions of the consent decree. In other words, they're agreeing that they committed this offense, but we're going to hold off on the adjudication and put them under supervision. And if they fulfill the obligations to the court, whether it be community service, a competency development program, if they have a drug and alcohol assessment and says they need to complete in inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment, the Commonwealth can say, hey, we want that on the record that this juvenile complete treatment because that's what's in the best interest of them and the community, and that they have 6 months to a year in order to do so.
So you made reference to criminogenic needs. How are those determined? What instrument does the department use?
We use the YLS, which is the youth level of service.
And do you have any rates on the override of the YLS score and the extent to which you use consent decrees in the county?
Not currently on me, but I absolutely can get them for you.
Okay.
I don't believe we override the YLS very often unless in certain cases, which are usually sex offenses.
But you'll have numbers on that.
We will get you numbers. The benefits of a consent decree include that it's between 6 to 12 months. It's usually an agreement between the attorneys. The ADA will say, I want this kid on supervision for a year, or I want this kid on supervision for 6 months, and then the public defender or their private attorney would agree, yes, 6 months, yes, a year. They go back and forth. Every 6 months, we would review the case in court and say, hey, this kid is following his obligations. He's made sure he's completed all of his obligations to juvenile court, or no, there's problems in the home, he's not completing this, she or he is not completing their obligations to the court. If at any time during that supervision they get a new charge, the Commonwealth can say, we're revoking your consent decree and refiling the petition. So when they agree to a consent decree, they're also saying, I don't plan on getting any other charges. The other benefit is that after 6 months after closing, so we close the consent decree in January, 6 months later, July 1st, the juvenile probation department will look to expunge that record as well. The juvenile does not have to do anything. It's completely on the probation department in order to expunge the case. The other diversion is deferred adjudication, which is after the court enters a finding that the juvenile did commit the offense. Assuming that there is a finding that the juvenile did commit the offense, the Rule 409B would allow the court to release the juvenile from the court's jurisdiction if it does not find that the juvenile needs supervision, treatment, or rehabilitation. We have 60 days and can be extended by the agreement of counsel. And if we find that the juvenile is not in need of treatment, supervision, or rehabilitation, the case is dismissed and expunged. So an example would be that, say it took 10 months for this case to go to court and it was a simple assault case. And since then, the juvenile has completed treatment in the community. Maybe they took it upon themselves to get mental health treatment. They're now on their medication. They're doing well in school. They have A's and B's. The juvenile probation department may say, we don't really think this kid needs to be on supervision because they've already done everything that we would put in place. So the court can say, we can ask the court to, have that it did happen, he did commit this offense, but we're dismissing it because he doesn't need treatment. So those are our levels of diversion. After diversion, there is adjudication, which is similar to a conviction in court. So court makes a finding that the juvenile is in need of treatment, supervision, and rehabilitation. If the court previously found the juvenile to have committed a felony, there is a presumption that treatment, supervision, and rehabilitation is needed. So the levels after adjudication would be probation, which is supervision, programs, and services regardless of the intensity delivered in the community. There's also placement, which is out-of-home supervision, which would include intensive programs and services delivered within a facility. There are different levels of facilities. We have group homes, community residential programs, which would be like an open environment, and services can be contracted out. Then we have alternative treatment programs. We have weekend programs. One current example that we currently use is Diacon weekend program, where the juvenile is in the community during the week. And then on the weekend, they take a bus up and they go participate in a program. There's foster care, which could include kinship care, group homes, supervised and independent living programs. Then there are residential programs. And then there's private secure residential programs versus state secure programs. The difference between a private secure residential program is that that program is privately operated and they have the right to refuse us service, just as the detention facilities also have the right to refuse us service. So state secure programs cannot refuse us services. So upon release from detention or placement, there is aftercare, which I'm going to go into, but I just want to get into detention first, so because aftercare can be after detention and or placement. So I know you guys were interested in alternatives to detention. Detention is any facility privately or publicly owned and or operated, designated by the court and approved by the Department of Public Welfare to detain a juvenile temporarily, and the term detention facility when used in these rules shall include shelter care, and detention facility shall not include any county jail or state prison. So I guess the public pays 50-50 and it's privately funded 50-50. Any alternatives that we currently use to detention or pre-adjudicatory detention would be an expedited intake. An intake conference could take place within 72 hours. Another alternative would be expedited court hearings. There would be an immediate intake conference and a court hearing within 72 hours. Intensive supervision, which can vary. A probation staff could see the kid 3 times a week, 2 times a week. There could be a strict in-home curfew. They could have to call in, and say, call in every day and check in with their probation officer. They may have to give a drug screen once a week. There's supervised in-home detention, which is restricted to the home and parent supervised. They can go out for medical education and other approved activities. There's community programs with or without GPS monitors, and supervision of youth pending court can provide transportation to court and can be paired with GPS. There's alternative living situations, saying they could go live with an approved guardian, another biological family member if there's issues in the home and it's not best for the juvenile to be in that home, and maybe that's why they're out committing crime. And we can also draw on any of our community-based providers for a GPS or for any pre-adjudicatory alternative to detention. So they would provide us both pre-adjudicatory and post-adjudicatory services. I know that this Friday we are having a stakeholder engagement as it relates to the implementation of the Pennsylvania Detention Risk Assessment, and that if you guys can attend, you'll be better able to understand the intentional focus of that tool, why we're using it, how it works, its statistical component. And we would hope that you guys find it informative and that you might take advantage of this opportunity and other stakeholder engagements in the future. So after there's diversion, detention, placement. Other alternatives to placement would be our community-based programs, which would include Diacon. We have the Bridge program, which is kind of like a mentoring program. They're paired with a mentor who meets with them several hours throughout the week, provide services to the family. There's also the weekend program, like I discussed, where they're in the home during the week, and then on the weekend they go away and do their treatment program, which also allows the kid to be out of the community for the weekend where they may not have a structured time frame where they do, school, home, dinner, sports during the week. We also have the Academy, Community Management Services, and they provide us ART in the community. We have Be Proud, which is the client accountability program. George Jr. has preventative and aftercare, so the preventative care would be for our pre-adjudicatory cases. We have Abraxas Path, prevention, and Path aftercare. So Abraxas Path provides services to the family while the juvenile is in the Abraxas facilities. So they'll go visit the juvenile while they're in the facility and also visit the family while the juvenile's in the facility. And the goal of that is so that when they're planning for coming back to the community ahead of time, not 1 month ahead of time, they're planning for their reentry the minute they go into placement, because that is the goal. The ultimate goal is to bring the kid home and be safely in the community. We also have Justice Works, which provides VIP services, institutional case management. Institutional case management is that they will go visit our kids once a month in a facility if the facility is over 2 hours away. So our juvenile probation officers are expected to see your kids once a month in a facility face-to-face. They are also currently required to call them once a week while they're in a facility and have a Zoom meeting. We're now trying to get the Zoom meeting more back to the face-to-face, as COVID is kind of letting up, but also, we're back and forth with that. So, but we have decided that juvenile probation officers should be going back to face-to-face visits. If for some reason they cannot get a face-to-face visit, they should be doing their Zoom calls to see the kid. Every week they're asking them about their safety in the facility, if they feel safe, if they're eating, if they've had contact with their family, are they getting any toiletries that they need, do they have any issues with the facility, and we also ask that they talk to the kids without a staff member present so that the kid may speak freely should they want to report anything negative. We have a very limited number of juveniles in placement right now. I believe the number is like 19 kids. So, and we haven't had any issues with our staff completing all of those obligations at all. We also have SAAY, which is Sexually Abused and Abusive Youth, which the service is provided for victims and offenders, and it's based on their need, and that is to address problematic sexual behaviors. We do have general programs and services that are offered not just through the probation department, but other services throughout the county, and that would include like Big Brothers Big Sisters, ART, MST, Project Toward No Drug Abuse, the Strengthening Families Program for Parents and Youth, the Strong African American Families, Trauma-Focused Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and then we have high fidelity wraparounds as well. So I know I'm gonna get into some of the specific questions you guys answered now. I know that was a lot, it's very comprehensive. I'm trying to really nail down the whole entire juvenile justice system, so sorry if I'm being long-winded, I apologize.
Kirsten, why don't we pause there
Okay.
before you get into any sort of detailed questions, but questions from the board on what we've heard so far?
So can I ask, the process of when the decision is made of which of these diversionary, if there is going to be some sort of diversionary approach, what it's going to be? Is that solely probation department, or does the deputy or private attorney have a say there? How does that logistically happen?
It depends on the stage of the process. For example, if a school recognizes the need for services, a school-based referral can be made for many of the services available in the community, and that would be like before the kid even comes to probation.
So the school,
Kirsten, can you make sure you're by the mic?
I'm sorry.
Yep.
so some administrator of the school would decide where this kid should go?
It depends on what service you're looking for. So like a kid may not be on juvenile probation, but you know, the school can refer to the truancy program that I was talking about, which they are referring them to a prevention program. So I guess you could say the best offense is a good defense. So the best defense against, or best offense against delinquency would be defense, which these prevention programs are aimed to do. Now, do kids bypass them? Absolutely. So then so you're talking about it specifically, if an allegation is made and an intake conference is held, a juvenile probation officer would determine, juvenile probation determines if the child would be appropriate for diversion with the consent of the Commonwealth, which would be like an informal adjustment. So it's not made solely by probation. We, in conjunction with the ADA, the public defenders, an informal adjustment, you don't necessarily need to ask the public defender because you'd first have to ask the district attorney if they're even willing to consider the kid for a diversionary program. If the ADA is not willing to consider the kid for a diversionary program, then probation would have to go back to the drawing board, if that makes sense.
Wouldn't it be that, would the court then, when you're at that point, the court would approve that, whether they need a diversionary program, what would be suitable along with the, the consent and agreement you just discussed? But ultimately, once someone enters into the criminal justice system, once not at school or beyond, when they've gone beyond, it's a court decision.
Yes and no. Yes and no. So go ahead, Your Honor.
No, go ahead.
So for an informal adjustment, it's not a court decision. It's not up to the court. For a consent decree, that is up to the court. It's up to the ADA and the public defenders have to agree, and then the judge would also have to accept that the juvenile is being placed in the consent decree program. Kind of like how a judge would also have to accept a sentencing plea.
Thank you.
Your
I
Honor.
have two things. One is an observation, which I will do later on after everybody's finished. But the other one, you mentioned the program you were going to invite us to, and I didn't get it. Could you repeat that again?
Yes, there's a stakeholder engagement on Friday at noon.
This coming Friday?
This coming Friday at noon. It's on the implementation of the PADRE, which is the Pennsylvania Detention Risk Assessment Tool.
Mm-hmm. And where will that be?
I believe it's held via Zoom
Zoom? At noon.
at noon.
Okay.
And I believe Ms. DiMatteo will send out the invites.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Two questions. Thank you for your presentation, by the way. My first question is, does your office track recidivism? Have any numbers on the kids that you're seeing coming in and out? And essentially, if your intervention, or the interventions of the court, or all these other programs have been effective, are we seeing the same kids?
Hey, do you want to do it? Yes and no, but I'll speak more on that. But
Yeah, and if I could add to that question, because I had a similar one, is it looked at by program? So are you evaluating these programs from the premise of recidivism, which are really being effective and which perhaps are not?
So generally, our data is collected and contributes to the state recidivism report that's published from the Juvenile Court Judges Commission. In fact, the most recent version was published about a month ago, which it's online and I can certainly share a link following the meeting. In fact, I'll include it with the stakeholder engagement if that's helpful. And I believe, without having it in front of me, that our general recidivism, which is measured 2 years post-closing, has gone down. So we were in the 20%, and I believe that we were in the high teen %, which is good, that we've gone down.
Gone down since when?
For the last report. So the report is done over a 2-year period of time. So I think this ends, the collection in the report, I believe, is either 2018 or 2019 without having it in front of me.
Okay.
But I will, like I said, forward the link and share that. And then the other past reports that were done are also available at the same link.
And you're talking specific to Delaware County.
And they capture the state and the county specifically.
And we'll see that.
Yes, so you can see the state recidivism, and then you can see all the county recidivism.
And Danielle, just to be clear, is that recidivism for juveniles who have been detained, or are we talking about?
That's general for the system as a whole, for all cases that have come into the system and have closed. Outcomes are collected broadly regardless of detention or placement.
So it's actually not that responsive to Candace's question, right? Because
Are
it
you
sounded like she was asking about the effectiveness of the programs. Given that a kid goes into a program, is that kid more or less likely to recidivate?
I guess that's a
Based
two-part,
on that.
right? So I would understand that each program is gonna do their own evaluation. That's not as helpful to me, or at least what I'm thinking about understanding from the juvenile justice standpoint of the county. Are we seeing kids come back in and be involved with the system as a whole here in the county?
So there are some local information that's collected in preparation for our needs-based plan that we have to submit every year for OCYF that we do jointly with CYS, and that looks a little bit more specifically at programs in replacement or reoffense, either I believe while in service or post-service. So we can pull some of those numbers together, like we have the needs-based plan that we just finished, and that has some statistics in it, and then we can pull the state report to show you our overall recidivism. And then, of course, Kirsten's going to talk a little bit more about the programs, but they all submit, various outcomes and such, which is one of the reasons why we are committed to the spec process, which she's going to explain, again, as the second part of her presentation here, talks a little bit about measuring these programs in terms of their delivery of specific services and those services being delivered to fidelity. So I'm hopeful that some of the information that she'll present soon will answer some of those questions for you.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, as it relates to the programs that you're referring these children to, the diversion programs, what challenges have you seen as a result of the pandemic? We know that there's been many cuts, we know that there's waiting lists, we know that some of the
So I think
agencies you just mentioned aren't open right now. So what challenges have you seen?
So I think the significant challenge that we face across the board is the availability of the service, meaning wait list and duration. So we were just speaking about recently a case today in consultation with one of my supervisors where there was a referral to a program. It was an 11-week wait. At this point now, the behaviors are kind of escalating, both in the school and at home. So I think regardless of any of those services, outside of our direct contracted programs, again, that are not necessarily treatment specific, they might be more case management or, assistance to the services for the child in terms of getting them transportation, getting them to their appointments, helping them learn to manage in the community in their home. They do a lot of, they respond to the family when there's an issue in the home. But I think when you're talking about the level of service for your moderate and high-risk child that needs mental health services or needs intensive services, they are difficult to get. There are wait lists. I think they're experiencing the staffing issues the same as all of the providers are. They just have not been able to hire or retain staff, especially since the pandemic. There were staffing concerns before that, and they would ebb and flow, but recently, since the pandemic, it's been significantly more difficult. I can tell you, we were just in one of the alternative schools this afternoon, and again, they have 8 personal child specific attendants at the school, that they have 8 vacancies. So a child who's entitled to a one-on-one, may not be getting the attention that they need while in the school. And that's an alternative setting. So I think this is just as I said with the detention being, kind of statewide, I think this is a looming issue across the board for everybody.
This is a system-wide issue.
Yeah.
So in regards to your question about whether programs and service providers are required to provide outcome data, they are required to provide outcome data for sure. It is provider-driven. Those programs are also reviewed, audited, and evaluated. However, the structure and the review of the evaluation are provided and county-driven as well. We're in various stages of the implementation of the juvenile justice system of enhancement strategies. And one very important component of our commitment to this is our commitment to the SPEP process, which SPEP is the Standardized Program Evaluation Protocol, which is supported by the Juvenile Court Judges Commission and the PA Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Epicenter. What it aims to do is, so SPEP aims to have juveniles in evidence-based programming for the targeted dosage and duration rates for that particular program, in order to provide the juvenile the best chance at lowering recidivism rates. So if they are in an ART program, ART's best practices says that it should be a 10-week program, and they should be getting X amount of hours a week in this 10-week program. If the juvenile completes this program, they are more likely, as it's evidence-based, they are more likely to not reoffend as people who don't complete the program. So what SPEP is doing throughout the state is we are going into residential placements, community-based programs, and we're evaluating how well these programs are providing the evidence-based programming to fidelity. So just today, I was on a 4-hour phone call with CTUB, and we are evaluating 3 of their programs. Their IBHS, which is their Intensive Behavioral Health Services. Right now, a juvenile is getting 1 hour a week in their program of individual counseling. So we are evaluating how effective they are providing that counseling, and if they're doing it to fidelity, so that when a juvenile comes out, they're less likely to reoffend. We are also going to be stepping their ART services and making sure that they're implementing that to fidelity. And then we're also going to be stepping their trauma-focused CBT program, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. But essentially, it strives to improve the quality of service of delivery to the juvenile justice involved youth. It assists in matching the right services to the right youth for the right amount of time. It focuses on services for moderate to very high risk youth. Low risk offenders don't tend to recidivate as much as moderate to high risk youth. It engages service providers and juvenile probation in a collaborative effort to improve services through the flexible development of a performance improvement plan. So once we go through the service, they're given a score, and their score may be 7 out of 20. So what we do is provide quarterly performance improvement plans, like we'll provide recommendations to make the program more evidence-based to fidelity. Like if they don't have a written manual that this service is supposed to be following, one of our recommendations would be by June of 2020, they'll implement a manual for all staff. And then quarterly, we would review that to see if they're up to date on that service, that particular recommendation.
I have a question. So do you evaluate programs on other factors, whether besides the likelihood of reoffense of the juveniles? Are there other indicators that you look at?
I mean, there's other indicators that we look at on like on whether or not what kind of each placement provider may provide a different service to each juvenile. So like there's different.
Right.
So you would kind of look at it in the terms of where do I feel this juvenile is, if you're looking for placement, which is really placement is the last step. Nobody really wants to commit a juvenile to a placement facility. Like that's not what we're here to do. If we can't treat them in the community, and they're just continuing to reoffend, or they're not able to get those services in the community, then we would look at placement.
Right, well, so the reason I ask is that most evidence-based programs recognize that likelihood to reoffend is one of many indicators, right? So you have young people who come in that are referred from school, maybe they have a learning disability, maybe they have problems at home. So are there other indicators that you look at in terms of a program's efficacy, whether or not they, besides whether or not they reduce the likelihood of a kid to offend? Like completion of the program, behavioral therapy, school, job. Are there other things that we look at? Because
Yes, each service is looked at each individually. I don't know if that's helping you,
Okay.
so ART is looked at individually, VOTEC would be looked at individually, trying to place the kid in the right program
Right.
would be looked at individually on an individual basis,
Okay.
based off the YLS and their criminogenic needs, if that makes sense.
Right.
I just have a question, is each provider then has a contract with the county?
Mhm.
So then the contract comes to the county in some form or fashion, either really then to ultimately to county council, if it's over $25,000. So there would be a hearing, or, there's a public meeting where these things are vetted a lot. So I think some of it might be responsiveness of the vendor, whether the vendor's got, there's other aspects that are taken into account when contracts are vetted.
Well, to that point, Joanna, could we see the contracts for all of the providers that you named? Could that be provided to the board?
I mean, I absolutely have them. I'm unsure if we can provide the contracts. They're very lengthy.
I guess I talked to, I think they're on, I assume that they're on file with the county, because we contract
They're
through
in my
the,
office, I bet, you share.
we utilize the same process jointly with Human Services. So, I'm only looking at, Mr. Madden, only because when we present on contracts that specifically affect JPO, I'm often here with Ms. Garrison, or I'm often before council with Ms. Garrison on those specific, most of the contracts are shared between us and CCS.
Well, look, what I would say is, you've thrown a lot at us, and it's all appreciated, but there's a lot being sort of thrown about kind of verbally today. I think what would be helpful is to actually get this list of providers that you described today. And, we can probably track down the contracts if we know what contracts to look for, whether it's through the controller's office or through Human Services. But at this point, up till now, we don't even know what that list of contracts are to pull.
Are you looking specifically for placement providers or specifically for community-based providers?
Both, yeah.
Both, okay.
And I think, again, going back to the question earlier, if we are assessing the performance of these particular services, having that information for this board would really be helpful, just to, again, to understand what the overall context is of what the county's inheriting.
Okay, well, like I had previously mentioned, our current community-based providers are Diacon, the Academy, Be Proud, George Jr., Abraxas, Justice Works, and SAAY. Those are our current community-based providers. Our current placement providers would be Concern, which is Concerned Treatment Unit for Boys. I mean, we will get you.
Okay, again, yeah, just if you can just
If we could
shoot
get
a
it in
simple
writing
email.
with the contract,
Yeah,
that'd be
thank
great.
you.
All right.
If we're provided the vendor names, I mean, I think we can make a good shot at getting contracts to people. I mean, we would help, we should have them.
I'm sure the county has the contracts on
That's
file.
what I
So.
mean, that's what we
Yeah.
should be able to, and they should be, I just need names.
And I think it'll be helpful for you as well, Kirsten, honestly, because I think a lot of the performance measures that we've been asking you, what's required of the providers, we're assuming, would be in those contracts, right? It would have the, certain benchmarks for them, certain performance measures.
They are in
Hopefully.
the contract?
Well, they should be.
I guess they would provide the previous year's outcomes for you, yes.
And that would be
They'll
extraordinarily
give you the
helpful
program
as well.
descriptions and
Yeah.
such. So I don't know if the other contracts are other reviews, audits, and included but are not limited to county maximum audits, 4E reviews. A 4E audit is an audit performed by the statute which audits 4E invoices for a specified period under review. The audit pools select CYS and JPO 4E cases and reviews the pooled cases to make sure all corresponding documentation is provided, all invoice amounts are accurate, and all requirements are met for juveniles deemed to be 4E eligible. And also included in the 4E audit are reviews of JPO and CYS TANF invoices and RMTS forms. Then there's also the Auditor General. The AG audit is a full-scale audit of the Act 148 invoices for a select fiscal year for JPO and CYS, which includes the 2-year fiscal audits at a time. And then there's general program review and then incident reviews, which are provided by OCYF and the county department. I know there was some specific questions related to cost, so I'm just gonna go through them pretty quickly, if that matters, so.
Yeah,
Fiscal
again,
year-
if you
the
could
past
maybe
3
go
years.
through them quickly now, but really, you know, again, if you've got it in writing, to just send it over to us would be preferable.
Sure. All right, so I will just give you the past year then. For fiscal year 2020 to 2021, what is the current cost to the county for all community-based programs? It was $779,000, 20% of $3 million. So that's what we paid. The total cost was $3.9 million. The current cost to the county for all programs provided in detention, which would include expenditures, staffing, and general services. The county share is $2.5 million, 50% of $5 million. And I believe that's all I have. If there's any other, Candace?
I do have one question. Who is responsible, or is there a person responsible in your department for like quality assurance? Who oversees or who follows these providers and programs to determine if there's an 11-week wait list for a youth, or if services aren't being provided in the way that services aren't delivered in the way that they should be? And then at what point do you pull that contract? So who is responsible for
Contract review.
contract review,
Yeah.
quality assurance, if you will?
So that's actually what drew us to creating the position with Kirsten.
Okay.
When I took the position in my office, in my current position, we had staff, we had a large number of staff, but because of the retirement incentive, all the staff were eliminated. And so over the years, unfortunately, it took a long time, but we were able to, again, justify having a resource person specifically, and there said there's going to be a probation officer level staff, 1 or 2 under her that will assist with this. And that was part of the commitment with the staff, and now really doing the formal process across the board. Generally speaking, if there are, incidents in facilities or other things that come to our attention, whether it's from OCYF or it's from another county or, another circumstance that draws our attention to something, if there's a review of all the providers, so for example, in response to an incident on a GPS monitor, Kirsten will go out and research all of the cases that are involved with that particular provider, check to see if there's any other issue or discrepancy. Then generally we'll meet with the provider, work out a plan of correction. If it can be worked out, if it can't, then sometimes we suspend services internally, which means we put a hold on referrals. Other times we put referrals at various levels of approval, meaning that the supervisor, generally speaking, the probation officer and the supervisor make the referral for service.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that either in the intake unit or in the general case unit. So if there's a change in circumstances, then the providers are coded. If they require an administrator level review or a deputy, in some cases, like I said, we've suspended referrals. The contract has remained valid, but we suspended referrals because we were not necessarily satisfied with the program's response to our concern, or we were waiting for other elements like reviews by the state, licensing changes, and things of that nature, because residential services at a home placements are all licensed through OCYF. Community-based programs do not require the same level of licensing. For an example, we were referred to through Judge Kelly. We were asked to take a look at youth advocate program. I just talked to the gentleman this evening. So we spent the last couple of months, Kirsten went out, visited all the sites where they were functioning, reviewed some documentation, met with staff, talked to the staff who engaged with the provider, looked at their outcomes and such, And we were at the point just yesterday where I notified the principal judge that we believe that the pre-vetting has occurred and that we're satisfied and that we want to move forward with some program initiative. So that's a conversation that Kirsten will follow up with the vendor at this point now in her position, and we'll start moving that ball forward hopefully. I don't know if that gives you, yeah, thanks.
Would you also have data on the providers who've had referrals suspended and the reasons for those suspensions? Do you have that? Could you share that as well? That'd be great.
All right, I'd also just turn to our solicitors. Ms. Smith and Mr. Johnson, if you have any questions from your vantage point on what we just heard.
I do, I just have one or maybe two. You talked about the use of the wireless criteria.
You may want to go
but-
to the,
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
To the mic.
Yep.
Sorry, Shelley Smith, solicitor for the Juvenile Detention Board of Managers. Hi, how are you? You talked about the use of YLS criteria, which are criteria relating to potential recidivism, right? Do you use the detention risk assessment tool to determine in the first instance whether youth are appropriate, whether detention is appropriate for youth? And could you talk about that?
So as I think Kirsten mentioned, and that I failed to do at the beginning, so I apologize, is we've just recently implemented the use of the Pennsylvania Detention Risk Assessment. So our staff have been trained, we've gone through the coordinator sessions with the state, and we are doing a stakeholder engagement this Friday
Okay.
to share with the attorneys, kind of how it works, what statistics are available, what information we'll be able to collect, kind of how we're going to facilitate our implementation. And then we expect to have everything, system is set up and everything in place. They've already been doing it on some cases preliminarily, to get some practice and along with their normal, kind of doing it but not tracking it. So we anticipate that everything will be ready to go by November 1st.
So,
Sorry. When was the risk assessment instrument adopted? Putting aside that you guys are implementing it now, but when was it adopted?
I couldn't tell you off the top of
Do
my
you,
head, I'm sorry.
do you know whether it's been used in other counties
Yes.
prior to now? It
So-
has been.
Yes.
Okay,
So-
so why are we just getting to it?
So I think that every county is at various stages of implementation of the juvenile justice system enhancement strategy. That is one of the stages or one of the components. I can send a copy of the monograph if I did not provide it early on with materials that I had provided to Carlton. And that's just a copy of the basic monograph. But there's actually details in there that would tell you what's involved with every stage and where we are. So all counties are at varying stages. Now, I do understand that with Delaware County committing to use the Pennsylvania Detention Risk Assessment, that will be one of the last large counties to commit.
Or the last one, county.
I believe so.
And
There are other counties that have not yet done so,
other smaller counties.
from what I understand.
Okay. And what assessment process are you using now to make a determination as to whether detention or some other disposition is appropriate for juvenile?
So most of the information that's being collected in the detention risk assessment is similar information that we were collecting before. The collection of the information is not necessarily different. I think the benefits of the detention, the state risk assessment is the ability to collect it within a case management system, the ability to be able to report out and analyze that data a lot easier than it is to do it manually with case reviews and such. It certainly assists in keeping, we have a small group of staff who make detention decisions in our office. In most counties, it's a probation level decision. Delaware County has always had that decision made by supervisors. So we have a much smaller group of staff who make the decision where, like I said, in other counties, it could be 40 or 50 people making similar decisions, but it certainly, helps to keep everyone making the same decision, keeping it true to fidelity, collecting the information, and being able to analyze it.
The risk assessment tool has a scoring sheet, right?
It
There's a
does.
scoring process. Did you use a scoring sheet or some kind of scoring process in the sort of less formal system that you used prior to the implementation?
There was no captured score now.
Okay. And do you maintain records within each case? Prior to the implementation of the use of the tool, did you maintain records of the risk assessment that was made in each case with respect to whether detention without recording the determination that was made and the basis for it in each case.
Well, I think there's two parts to that. So I think that the information was captured in our general requirement to document our notes of what information we obtained, what information we had available to us. You know, what steps or contact was made at the time of the decision. And then the decision itself, and then of course there's a probation officers, when they make the decision, they have to execute a D1, and they have to file that D1 with the center and with the state. And that continues even with or without the use of the detention risk assessment.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten. I think this was very helpful. All right. I think at this point we can move on to our subcommittee reports. Ms. Schaefer, do you want to give any kind of an update on the Human Resources Committee?
Sure. Our personnel department, our HR department is setting up the follow-up secondary interviews and walkthroughs of the facility next week. And she's offering Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to the candidates. Our volunteers put together some questions and 3 or 4 hypotheticals, which Stacy is putting them all together, and I will circulate those to everyone before the actual interviews happen, so that everyone has a say in what's asked and the hypotheticals that are given. And then that's it. That's the next step. Is next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday we'll have this, and everyone will have an opportunity to participate in the, not in the walkthrough, but in the secondary interview. I think we had discussed that we would prefer to have it in person, that and then we would try to set up a Zoom for those who couldn't make it. I'm not sure that we've worked out the logistics of how that's going to happen, but
Yeah,
that's what we had discussed.
I would strongly encourage that we need to, for those who are able to, that there be the in-person option, and for those who perhaps can't but would like to participate via Zoom, we've done that sort of a hybrid interview and other things, and I think we can do so here.
And we have, as the candidate process closed, we're not expecting any additional candidates.
That I don't know. I'm not aware. And others, I don't think it's posted anymore.
No, the posting window is closed.
Yeah. That's it. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. Facilities and contract.
So we have toured the facilities and we are awaiting the contract. So I think, we're just happy to hear that they're forthcoming, and as soon as we have the full complement of contracts, we'll distribute it among the subcommittee members, and then we'll have, I'm sure, a lot more to report out on.
Yeah, and Mr. Lazarus, I think now would be an appropriate time if there is some update on conversations with Chester County.
Thank you and good afternoon. As it relates to our approaching Chester County to contract to reserve spaces or beds in their facility, I had an opportunity to correspond with their Chief Administrative Officer, Robert Cagle, and we have time set aside later this week to talk about shared services, including reserving the spaces in their facility. So I think the opportunity to look at several different shared services, and the fact that we have a strong relationship with Chester County will help us reach an agreement on reserving those facilities.
That's great news.
I will certainly, through the chair, let you all know where we are once I talk to Bobby later this week.
Any questions for our executive director?
Yeah, just very quickly. So the terms of that, the reserving of the spaces is essentially up to them, right? There's no real negotiating room, is there? It sounds like we don't have that in general with other counties if we're getting some of their bids.
I think between the conversations that council has had with the regional partners and that I've had with the other administrators, particularly as we've worked through the COVID pandemic, there's a strong regional collaboration. So I do think that we do have a strong relationships that have been developed that are mutually supportive. So I do think we have the opportunity to negotiate an agreement with them on sort of a communal basis.
Right, and, you know, we wouldn't want to muddy the waters at all, obviously, but is there any role that you envision for the subcommittee? Are there things that it would be useful for us to bring to your attention if we had questions or a wish list of some kind?
I think the conversation we'll have with Mr. Cagle this week really is just kind of setting the stage and talking about growth requirements. And then once I have that, we'll come back and talk about the things you'd like to see integrated into the agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lazarus. While you're up there, discussion of the 2022 budget preparation.
Sure, and if you'll give me a little bit of leeway to start, I want to follow up on some
Please.
other items. So kind of start big and then narrow the focus down. We do have started the process to look at the Juvenile Detention Center facility. We have an architect engaged. I think he's reached out, starting with the Public Defender's Office, to look at potential conversion of part of that space for a central booking facility. And that's, there's legal requirements as well as physical requirements with that. But I think the good news is that we have started using the on-demand architectural service contracts that council approved for us. There is also a recruitment not only for the juvenile detention superintendent, which Ms. Schaefer talked about, but also an ongoing recruitment for a community justice and rehabilitation program manager, which will help integrate services across the county for those who enter the criminal justice or community justice system, specifically trying to get people the help they need to navigate through the vast array of social services that are offered with the first contact to the system to help them not get deeper into it, but get the help that they need. That also then interfaces with the health department, which will be formed early in 2022.
And to be clear, this person would really serve for both adult and juvenile.
Correct. And what's relevant really from a budget standpoint is the funding for that position is in council's budget, and I moved it in next year's budget from the Juvenile Detention Center budget into council's budget. So those are some things that influence budgeting and programming. Big picture, the schedule for the budget, I have to submit the draft budget to council on November 2nd. Council goes through a period of review throughout the month of November, ending with the county clerk posting the budget for public review November 22nd. Council will have the open public meeting on the budget on December 7th, and then they'll adopt it not later than the 15th. That's all spelled out in the county charter. As it relates to the Juvenile Detention Center budget and the juvenile kitchen budget, there are placeholders in there pending your development of programs. So right now there's $1.5 million in the Juvenile Detention Center budget, and then there's $500,000 in juvenile kitchen. It's also important to know, though, that there's $15 million under the control of the courts. $10 million is in the juvenile court system, and $5 million is under the heading of maintenance of juveniles. Those are largely reimbursed through state funds and federal funds. So as we go down the path, if those services are reduced, we not only reduce the cost, but we reduce the reimbursement as well. So those are programs that support what Danielle talked about and her staff talked about, but that's in the budget as well. So there's an artificial separation organization, but we know they all work together to the benefit of the community. When I talk about the budget, I want to talk about a couple different sources. There's the operating budget, the capital budget, grants, and I want to touch a little bit on the American Rescue Plan Act, which also is a unique funding opportunity. As we put the budget together, it'll be presented really in 4 parts. There is an operating budget discussion, a capital budget discussion, and then this year we're going to put out data. People love data. We're going to put out a data volume just so people can see to their heart's content where the money is throughout the budget. The first 2 volumes will be delivered to council in a week and a half. The data will come once the budget's adopted, and then later after really the first of the year, we're going to look at putting together a digital version of the budget so you can explore the budget online, because most of what we post are PDFs and it's kind of hard to find what you want. So we're going to look at doing that as well, all in the interest of supporting the council's values of accountability and transparency. If you look at the 22 budget, there are some new things in there. There is the county health department, which is a new introduction. There is increased investment in parks and open space and economic recovery. We are moving towards deprivatization of George W. Hill, which does impact on your missions. And there is the commitment to look at community justice and rehabilitation. Those are new things that we are able to fund. Within the operating budget, as I said, there are two funds that impact directly from the operations side. And those are the Juvenile Detention Center at $1.5 million and the Juvenile Kitchen at $500,000. And I talked about those budgets that are under the control of the courts as well. Within the capital program, we have an allocation to look at the Juvenile Detention Center with the concept of it being partially dedicated to central booking and then partially to detention. That may change based upon the determination to contract with Chester County. So, but we did put the funds in there for capital improvements. On the grant side, there are a lot of grants that come out of the Human Services Department and Human Services area that support the juvenile process. I think that's something that, in accordance with your request, we can outlay what the contracts are and what those associated services are. That is primarily grant funded by federal and state resources. And finally, under the American Rescue Plan Act, community justice is something that is an allowable cost. Right now, with discussion with both the district attorney and the public defender, out of the $110 million the county will receive, we've looked initially at it setting aside somewhere between $6 and $7 million. There's nothing magical about that other than the public defender made a recommendation we set up around 7%. That was a pretty good number. There are some small things that have been funded within that amount, including the gun violence reduction program through the district attorney's office, which we are going to propose be integrated into the 2022 budget. And there are some programs that are being administered through workforce development as well. But it does provide us with a unique opportunity for one-time or limited program stand up for things that will help with the overall administration of juvenile justice and juvenile rehabilitation. So that's sort of the big picture on the budget. Really what I would need from this body is a discussion as to what are the goals and objectives that you hope to accomplish in this year's budget. Every agency has been asked for their goals and objectives and the horizon issues they see that will influence them long term. So that'll be a helpful conversation. As I go through the budget adoption process with council, we'll reserve those funds that are there, and we can then set the next year's budget, or next year as we walk through that, we can determine what the best uses of those funds are. So I want to make sure we preserve what was funded in the past to that about $2 million level, and then we can allocate those to the programs that you want to adopt.
So, Mr. Lazarus, just in terms of the most efficient way of integrating the input of this board into the budget, what are your thoughts on how we do that? I mean, anything that you can provide, again, I think via email to the board that gives some context for the figures that you described, how they compare from this year to next year. And then, I guess what I'm proposing is, would it be appropriate timing that the board have the opportunity at next month's meeting to, provide any comments that they have on it and provide, as you asked for, some guidance on values that we'd like to see integrated into the 2022 budget?
And I would appreciate that. Again, the council won't vote on adopting the budget until December 15th. So while I'll show the reservation of funds, certainly there's time and opportunity to integrate programs into the final budget documents. So I think the best thing is probably to give maybe some worksheets and some planning documents to help guide the discussion. Then we can get together at the next meeting and walk through those and consolidate them. And remember, budgeting is an ongoing process. The budget does a couple of things besides just align numbers and columns. It does express the community's values, and it does provide a work plan. So one of the things we are moving towards are performance measures. So what are the outcomes we hope to get by the expenditure investment of certain public dollars? So I can provide some worksheets to that extent, both the ones that the controller and I have used to put the budget together, but also some of the goals and objectives you'd like to see.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I just want to say I appreciate the presentation. It's very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all you're doing.
Mr. Lazarus, I think one other suggestion I have, and I'm really, I guess, thinking more to my fellow members here, it might be helpful for us to have a temporary committee on this front, have a subcommittee of a few members who can make sure that we're spearheading, integrating the input of the larger board so that we may, given the fact that we are on a tight time frame here, if a few people from the board would be willing to kind of take the lead on ensuring that we do this efficiently.
I volunteer for that.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I think probably one of the members of county council should be on that as
Yeah,
well.
I'd be happy to work on that.
Thank you, Shiver.
I could pull somebody from my staff probably to help. It's gone through pulling our budget together,
Okay,
so they're familiar with the process that's utilized by Mr. Lazarus in budget.
thanks, Joanne.
But just having said that, in the next 6-8 weeks, we are not going to have made the substantive decisions about exactly what type of facility, where.
Of course not.
So we're going to really be spitballing it.
Yeah, sure.
That's understandable. I think we have to, provide guidance based on where we are today and understanding where we are on it. All right, so if there are other thoughts on that, I would suggest that we create this subcommittee for budgeting that involves Councilwoman Schaefer, Controller Phillips, or someone from her office, and Judge Nichols. Is that good? All right. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item for today/tonight is a discussion of presentations offered for future meetings. So I will say I think today's presentation by Ms. DiMatteo was extremely helpful. And Ms. Fitzgerald, thank you. And as we've talked about, I think we have a few other groups, both, internal to the county government and external, that we're working to line up for future meetings. As again, we're sort of on this high, pitched learning curve given the newness of this board. But again, any other thoughts from the board on this topic?
Well, I missed a meeting in the beginning of it, and I may have missed this presentation already, but the group to which our parole staff referred that has just been approved.
Youth advocacy program?
Yes. Did we see a presentation from them?
We did.
Okay, that's the meeting I missed. Would it be worth hearing? Is there I don't understand whether there's a general program or there is a program being adapted to Delaware County. And if that's so, I think we should kind of hear what that program
Yeah.
for Delaware County.
Yeah, so youth advocates spoke with the board about what they have done elsewhere in the
Right.
country and what they could provide here in a more general sense. And it sounds as if there's been specific conversations with the court about what might be possible here.
So that's what I suspected, and if that's true,
Yeah.
it might be interesting to hear how
Sure.
this would look.
Is there actually someone from? Yes. And so perhaps if you're open to it, perhaps to speak during the public comments. All right. Next item on the agenda is new business. Anything of new business from the board?
Well, just a little old business
Yes.
to the previous agenda item. If folks can't think of it now, it'd be great if they could email suggested presentations. I don't know if folks can think on the fly about who they might want to see.
Or the ones that we've already emailed.
Right, or
and
the
they're
ones
already
that-
on the schedule, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yep.
Like the IU.
Yep.
On new business, it's kind of old business, but I wanted to loop back on the idea of getting into the building to retrieve documents. And been talking with the solicitor's office and our solicitor. So I'm hoping that, my understanding is there's been some clearance to be able to do that. And I really think that we need to get the building in order, at least the offices, which may have some contracts, but I think the same one should be at the county. But other records that need to just be retained and preserved for county record keeping and whatever. So I offered some of my staff for a limited amount of time to go possibly with a paralegal of some sort from Archer Law or from our solicitor's office. So I'd like to still offer that because we're used to retaining documents and work with them to get out there and see what's there. Because if it's probably the same way we all toured the facility, and I think we need to get that.
All right, thank you, Controller Phillips. Anything, do you want to add anything to
Also
that?
speak
Sure,
to that
if you'd like.
too as well. So,
We have discussed, as you said, with you, the availability of a paralegal from our office to go out to Lima, and all we need to do is coordinate that with
Right.
you. We're ready to send her, she's ready to go.
Okay.
And we did get clearance from the Attorney General's
Right.
office to get into the building. But there are some conditions about removing documents from the building if that's what we ultimately want to do. But first, as you said, we really need to see what's there.
Right.
So we also, once we get a sense of what's there, we can also offer the ability to scan those documents if we need to do that rather than remove them or whatever. But we can work with you guys to figure out the best way to both create kind of a database of what's there and also preserve what we need to preserve. So I'll coordinate with you offline
That would be
to
great.
get that set up so we can get moving on there.
Yeah, and if anyone else is interested, you're welcome to join in. I just know that I've got some people that, and we have records, so we're used to doing that, so.
Right. Okay,
Okay.
so we'll talk.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, next item on the agenda is our second round of public comments. So members of the public are free here to speak, and as I said earlier, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, and please tell your name and your address for the public at the outset. So any members of the public who'd like to speak, do so now.
Juvenile Justice Organization. We're in 32 states across the country, a few foreign countries, and we're about 20 counties here in Pennsylvania. But as I'm hearing, and the great presentation, just congratulations. The fact that you have 8 kids in detention and 19 in placement with a county this size is pretty damn good. And it's very manageable. And the best news about it, if you can even cut into those 27 kids and bring them down further, there's a lot of savings to be had to be reinvested into your continuum of care, which is, I understand, growing and pretty robust already. So there's some really good news here in the county, despite the past obstacles that you've hit. So it's very optimistic. And I just learned today that you are going to be at least recommending that we move forward with a contract with the Youth Advocate Program, which is great news. I didn't expect to hear that yet. But the other piece to this is that Youth Advocate Program is bringing in $550,000, over $500,000 into Delaware County to fund our program the first year. We'll when it's all set to go, we'll sit down with the design committee, representatives from probation, the courts, public defenders, the schools, everyone else that's affiliated to really design our core model. Will be our core model, but you can design the program, who sends referrals, what kind of kids, what happens to them, how it's evaluated, and what goals and objectives we want to attain as a county. And also congratulations to form this committee to really look at your juvenile justice system. I can tell you that's not happening in a lot of other places in Pennsylvania, nor across the country. There's not a lot of change going on right now. So I'll stop there. The program is designed to work with those 27 kids now in placement or detention. It's a very intensive service. As you can see, we're going to work with about 30 kids a year for well over $500,000. That's a pretty steep per kid cost, and the reason for that is We're really working with kids that normally you're going to spend 4 times that amount on detention or placement. So if we're successful, you're saving about 80% of the cost that you normally would spend and hopefully get better outcomes. So it's a 24/7 program. We hire advocates and staff from the community where the kids live. So if they're from Chester, that's where we're going to draw our staff. If they're from another part of the county, we're going to recruit advocates to work with the kids so they know the language, they know the culture. And we also prefer to hire people with lived experience. We call credible messengers. These are adults who are now stable and willing to give back and ready to give back, capable of giving back, but may have been in the system themselves, either as a juvenile or as an adult, or have overcome hardships themselves and come out the other end stronger and resilient and wanting to give back to help their community. They'll spend about 10, 15, 20, 30 hours a week with the advocates, with the kid and the family, 24/7 access to staff. We also have supported work. We'll subsidize employment. We can get these kids working the day we get the referral. A few days later, we assess their strengths. We'll actually place these kids in private sector with private sector employers for several weeks to really learn the ropes of that particular job. And we're not just going to do flipping burgers, but really look at what these kids are interested in, what's their skills, their assets, their strengths, their capabilities, and try to match that with an employer. So as you can see, it's pretty intensive. We do measure outcomes. It's a very individualized program, and across the country, we get pretty good outcomes with very high-risk populations. So I'll stop there, and if there's a question or if you want to work.
Any questions for Mr. Fleischer?
I had one quick question. So you said you measure outcomes, and earlier we had a conversation about recidivism as one outcome, the ultimate negative outcome, right?
Right.
That shows that a program intervention may not have worked the way that it was intended. Can you speak to other outcomes and what that might look like when you individualize an intervention?
Yeah, when we do our design meeting, we'll actually hear from you what you want us to measure.
Yep.
So that will be what we do. But in other programs, recidivism is the top measurement. We don't want these kids getting arrested. We don't want them being placed again in an institution. Jobs. Are they working? Are they in school? Are they doing well in school? Substance abuse. We measure use. Are they living with family? Are they in a community? Do they have a stable place to live? Beds and food and the basics. So we really go through all the life domains that a young person has, and we measure outcomes there. But those are the top ones that we measure, the ones I just mentioned. We can add to that, and we can also get more specific with the outcomes that we measure. We bought Social Solutions, which is a pretty well-known outcome measurement system, so we can literally individualize the outcomes for your county for the kids that we serve.
Thank you.
Well, I'll only say I'm really grateful for your coming to Delaware County, and I'm very hopeful to see what outcomes we can have here. So,
Great.
so thank you for coming in.
Thanks for the opportunity. We'd like to be partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleischer. Any other members of the public?
Good evening. My name is Mr. Mack. I'm from Chester Community Coalition. We provide trauma-informed therapy to families that have been affected by gun violence in the city of Chester and Delaware County. We also are in Crozier-Chester Hospital as a hospital violence intervention program. We're right there at the bedside when any victims come in with gunshot wounds or stab wounds. We provide therapy, case management, and follow-up after medical care. The purpose of us coming today, we offer services for youth, the ages from 4 to 18. We offer group services, individual services as far as therapy. So if you guys have an issue with finding a therapy service for youth that you're contracted with, you can always reach out to us and we can support them in those areas. We also partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. The DA's office has actually purchased 50 memberships because we provide the mental health first aid program within there. So we help them identify mental health issues, substance abuse issues, so they can get the help before it gets out of hand. We're also in Chester High School, and as well as the charter schools in the city of Chester. So we don't just service the city of Chester, we service Delaware County as a whole. So if you have clients or any family that's available, we're there to help. We also run groups every Thursday at Shiloh Baptist Church, which is at 7th and Central, for grief processing groups. So this fall, the current group is Thursday, and the next group will run in the spring for processing for victims that's been affected by gun violence. So the current group is the families that have actually lost loved ones to gun violence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Hello, my name is Latasha Hall. I am a resident of Springfield Township, and I'm also a parent of a child who was in placement. He was actually in one of these court rooms here in media when one of the judges placed him in a facility. My son went to that facility with a mental illness. He suffered from drug and alcohol abuse at the time because he was self-medicating. He was diagnosed with emotional disturbance, a couple other things under the umbrella of autism. And he went there to get help. He went there to get counseling, the treatment. None of those things were done. Within 6 months of him being in that facility, he was sexually molested over and over for a period of 6 months from a staff member at that facility. Since that happened, as his mom, I have been just trying to advocate for other children and to research and talk to other parents in reference to this. And I'm sitting here today and I'm listening to what you guys are saying, and it sounds really good, and I commend you guys for wanting to go out and help. But my concerns are there needs to be more accountability and management when you guys are hiring these people. The hiring practices, it has to be reviewed. There has to be more thorough background checks for these staff members. The person who sexually molested my son along with 4 other boys, he had something that was in his records that they didn't even know about until it went to court. I feel as though a lot of these employees are overworked, a lot of these facilities are understaffed, and a lot of them are working an extremely amount of overtime, which is not good for a lot of these kids. They get too comfortable with a lot of our kids. It's very inappropriate. There was no logs on any of these things. There was no cameras around. They didn't log in as to who the next shift was. There was no cameras there. They would take these boys into private closets inside this facility and molest them. They would take them to their school on the campus and molest them. As a parent, I feel as though if facilities are going to be open, I will hold you guys accountable to make sure that you guys are hiring the right people, that you are doing the proper background checks, that you guys are, what you're saying today is what you need to do. Care about the children. Think about a lot of these kids that are coming to these facilities. They're coming from single parents. They're coming from homes that are drugs, nothing but drugs in their home. They're coming from abuse. Some of them have so many things that are horrible with their backgrounds. And in that moment, to me, it felt as though all they cared, my son was just a number to them. I don't want that to happen to anyone else's child. I see what it has done to my son. He didn't get the services. He didn't get the help that he needed. I live this trauma as if it happened today. I still blame myself because I keep saying, you know, that judge that stood there and said, hey, I'm going to send your son to this facility. I should have said something. I should have stopped it. But I stood there as a parent, you know, trusting the system and thinking that they had his best interests at hand when all of this happened. I'm a Marine. I'm very educated. I work in the field. I've worked in this field for 21 years. I've worked with children with autism. I work with dual diagnosis. I work in a school now where I'm in charge of over 650 students. And I know each and every one of their names. I know their history. I know what is going on in their lives. That's the kind of people that you guys need to be looking out for. That's the kind of people that you would want to hire. Let's not bring another predator into these places where they can harm our children. If you're going to have staff members, make sure you have enough staff members. Make sure you're checking the logs. Make sure you have the data. Data is so important when you have facilities like this. I know for a fact it is very important. You got to have that. So as a parent, I'm asking you guys here, I'm pleading with you guys. I'm just one person. We're still going through it. My son is 26 years old. That was his little brother. And he struggled so much, and he's still struggling with the fact that he couldn't help his brother. And I need you guys to take this from me, my story, and try and apply it to one of those facilities that you're going to open up. And just be mindful of who you're hiring. Background checks. The overtime is great, but there's a thing called burnout. And a lot of these people that are being hired are burnout. A lot of them are not educated. A lot of them don't have the experience. A lot of them haven't walked in other people's shoes. As a parent, I had that child with that disability and that mental illness. I educated myself when I went to IEP meetings because they told me, sign on the dotted line. No, I educated myself. I put myself through school. And I learned how to write my son's IEPs. I learned everything up until he started getting older, and there was nothing that I could do. I couldn't force him to take medication. So then I had to leave it in the hands of the courts. So this is basically all I have to say. It sounds good, and I hope that this facility succeeds. But just think about the children that have suffered in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Good afternoon. Corey Long, Executive Director of the Making a Change Group, a 501c3 nonprofit based in the city of Chester, community-based organization. We primarily work with youth and families. We have a youth development program that prior to the pandemic was in all 6 of Chester Upland schools. And thanks to County Council and the CDBG Fund, we have a new case management-based program to work with the parents of those young people that we mentor. We also just received a grant from PCCD for violence prevention. Many of these kids that we work with in the city of Chester through our mentoring programs are the same ones primarily that come through LAMA, come through the Juvenile Detention centers here. And I like to think that our mentoring program has something to do with those low numbers of, 27 in placement and 8 in
19.
Yeah, so a total of 27. We just would like the opportunity to continue to partner with the county to design a program that works for the kids in Chester, many of those kids that I know personally. It's been a great partnership with our Connected Visions program at CDBG, and we thank you for the opportunity, and we just want to continue that partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Very good, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Ronald Williams. I'm also from the city of Chester. I work as the program manager for the Chester Peace Initiative, which is a Cure Violence Global mediation group that deals with gun violence in the city of Chester. We work with a constituency from 17 up to 35. We actively recruit and mediate what we consider to be high-risk individuals who are prone to violent behavior, and we try to interrupt the transmission of violence, provide a workable solution to helping them address their issues so that it does not escalate to the level of violence. And then we help try to change community norms by changing the community's perspective on violence. Our primary responsibilities are responding to gun violence incidents. In the city of Chester, we do have what's considered a target area that we have been working with. And as of 2020, when the pandemic hit, we went live in 2020, and the area that we were working in 2019 was one of the most active areas for gunshot victims and shootings. And as of the last year, you've heard on the news that the violence in the city of Chester has decreased. Our target area has seen a phenomenal change in the amount of young people that have been engaged in violence. Now, the city of Chester has seen a precipitous decrease in violence. Our particular target area last year, we experienced 12 homicides and 10 incidences of victims. This year, so far in our target area, we've seen 5 homicides and 2 other incidences of gunplay victims. And so we have seen a considerable amount of success with the program. Our longest time stretch, we measure our success by the number of days that there's not a gun shooting in our target area. Last year, the longest stretch of time between a gun incident was 99 days. That's the longest we went between shootings. The longest stretch was 99 days without a shooting, and then when a shooting occurred, our shortest span was 2 days. In 2021, so far, measuring the same amount of time, we've seen the longest stretch without a shooting has been 151 days, and then the shortest incidence of shooting has been less than 24 hours. We had an incident that happened in our target area. We weren't able to mediate the conflict and get it in calm. So we are here to try to support and keep individuals from having to come to the system by providing a public health approach to dealing with the individuals who are engaged in behavior that can lead to violence. And so one of the things that could be very helpful for us if we were able to have a relationship with the juvenile department and maybe hear some of those individuals who are coming to the community, maybe have an opportunity to meet them before they get back in that community, so that we can kind of partnership with them and have some sort of relationship opportunity to build with them. If we can get on the front end, we can eliminate a lot of violence. So we're here to serve. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and to hear what's going on in the Delaware County area.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Unfortunately, I need to excuse myself for a prior commitment. Ms. Williams, would you mind taking it from here?
Sure.
Thank you all. Squashed it. Well, if there's no more further comment.
I was going to say there's very little. for me
Any
to do.
comments from the board? Yes.
Thank Ms. DiMatteo and her staff for the presentation and for all the work they've done over the past year. I know it's been an unforeseen circumstance not having a facility, but I think they've done a good job trying to accommodate everybody.
Yes, I hope the people who just made presentations, if you have cards or something like that, you can provide to juvenile probation. I'd appreciate that. But my comment is specific to the presentation that was made by juvenile probation. And as the presentation was being made, I started to write notes. And I started to look at the notes, and I thought this was pretty significant, so I'm going to share it with the committee. These are the words I wrote down: poverty, race and racism, family dysfunction, domestic violence, community violence, discrimination, mental health, poor school performance, poor educational system, peers and peer pressure, and a juvenile brain. All of those things, I think, came out of the presentation that was done so well by juvenile probation. And to hear what these folks in the community have said, there's a link there. There's a link there. And I think that this county is poised to work together with those community organizations and with juvenile probation, because you all obviously have the laboring oar, so to speak, to really begin to make a difference. So I want to commend juvenile probation, this committee, and the people from the community who have made presentations here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor, for those remarks. structure of it. I would love to understand in the future, because I know we like to ask for things as you come back. And so what is the process for new programs to be considered? Because I heard you say at the request of the judge, you reviewed a certain program and you went through a pre-process. I also heard some really effective and cutting-edge innovative programs from the community. And I just want to make sure that there's transparency so that things that are working get reviewed consistently. If it's a recommendation from this committee or a recommendation from the judge, however we can get you most effective strategies or just promising practices that are working, especially for kids who are of color, and particularly Black kids, given the census racial dynamics that we live through. I think we need to be forward-thinking and intentional about how we pick those kinds of programs. And I just want to make sure that that process is clear and transparent to both the board members and the community members who are doing such great work. So thank you for your work and a little bit of homework so that I hope we get that information as well. I appreciate it.
And I guess I just want to add on to that. I mean, I think as a group, as we really look at the continuum of care and evaluate the current programs and their success, and as we look through those assessments and get that information, we might want to maybe consider having someone assess what all the programs are that are available throughout the full continuum, whether those are national programs or state programs or local programs, so that we kind of have a full list, or so we can really look at what is all out there and what's available and how we really build this to really provide the services that we know we need to provide. It's something to look into for the future.
Because I agree with Councilwoman Taylor. I also wanted to say that I think with due speed, the hiring process here just has to come, we need staff. And we can't, I know everybody's working in between on different things, but we really need a point person working for all of the board and for the county and to help, because these people, there was a whole staff at this building with executive directors and people that were working that might have had some of this information, and it's a lot for them to keep doing this. And I think we're close to it, and I'm looking forward to that, but I really do think that's something we need to really see happen. That person, whoever the superintendent, executive director, and then support staff for that person.
Right, and especially as we look to a system that is less a building and more a continuum of services, that is going to be one of the most important aspects of that person's job, is orchestrating, like being the conductor of all of this and making sure we are accessing what's already working in the community. I mean, that is a job in and of itself, So that person's got their work cut out for them.
Any other board member comments? Nope. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert, all in, so moved, second, aye.